He used to kid me about it, that I was the first national figure to endorse him in 1976 when he ran for president. There was an overwhelming reason for it, his character. What I find extraordinary about Jimmy Carter, though, is that millions of people all around the world, all over the world, feel they lost a friend as well, even though they never met him. And that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by words, but by his deeds. Just look at his life's work. He worked to eradicate disease, not just at home, but around the world. He forged peace, advanced civil rights, human rights, promoted free and fair elections around the world. He built housing for the homeless with his own hands. And his compassion and moral clarity lifted people up and changed lives and saved lives all over the globe. Jimmy Carter was just as courageous in his battle against cancer as he was in everything in his life. Cancer was a common bond between our two families, as of many other families. And our son Bo died. When he died, Jimmy and Rosalind were there to help us heal. Jimmy knew the ravages of the disease too well. He lost his father, his brother, his sisters to this terrible disease. So when Jimmy was diagnosed, we did our best to comfort him. We met with him down in Plains. We met with him. And anyway, we talked and shared our beliefs that as a nation, we have the talent. We have the talent and the resources to one day end cancer as we know it if we make the investments. He believed that like I do. I'll always cherish having seen Jimmy and Rosalind Carter together. Theirs was a love affair of the ages. While we'll miss them both dearly, I do take some solace in our kids were saying it, that they're united once again. We're going to remain forever in our hearts, but they're together again. The entire Carter family, on behalf of the world, the whole nation, we send our whole heartfelt sympathies and gratitude. Our gratitude for sharing President Carter with us for so many years. You know, Jimmy Carter stands as a model of what it means to live a life of meaning and purpose, life of principle, faith, and humility. His life dedicated to others. You know, he was like my dad. He thought that, he said, Joey, your job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about dignity, your dignity. About being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, everything's going to be okay. He believed, as I do, and many as you do, that that's absolutely possible. It's within our grasp to do that. It's not that hard. In his life, he served the nation in the Navy. He led the state of Georgia. He became president and a beloved statesman all over the world. But to know his core, you need to know he never stopped being a Sunday school teacher at that Baptist church in Plains, Georgia. Today's world, some look at Jimmy Carter and see a man of a bygone era. With honesty and character, faith and humility, it mattered. But I don't believe it's a bygone era. I see a man not only of our times, but for all times. Someone who embodied the most fundamental human values we can never let slip away. Although sometimes it seems like it is. We may never see his like again. We'd all do well to try to be a little more like Jimmy Carter. You know, my mom, you've heard me say this before, used to say, bravery lives in every heart, and someday it'll be summoned. Every time it was summoned, he stepped up. Every time, politically, personally, morally. And, you know, everything. The one thing I admired most about him, he thought and believed, and he really did believe this, and I do as well, that everybody deserves an even shot. No guarantees, just a shot. Everybody deserves a shot. And, you know, he gave an awful lot of people a chance. So, as I said, I was an admirer. I considered myself a friend. Kept in touch with him, and his son, I was going to tell you a story his son told me, but that would be inappropriate. Maybe he'll tell you, but about I think he's happy. I think he's happy with Rosalind. So.
Mr. President, as you think about your post-presidency, is there anything about Jimmy Carter's time after leaving office that inspired you for the years ahead?
Yeah, never give up hope. Never give up hope. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. So much negativism out there. I know you're tired of hearing me say it over the last 4 years. But folks, there's nothing beyond our capacity. Nothing beyond our capacity. If we do it together. And I mean it. I mean it. And he believed it.
Sir, what is your fondest memory of Jimmy Carter?
I have a number of them. I guess maybe my fondest memory of Jimmy Carter was when he grabbed me by the arm and said, I need you to help me in my campaign. And I said, I've only been around a couple of years, Mr. Governor. He said, no, it'll make a difference. I said, I'm not sure it will. He said, no, it will. When I endorsed him for president, I told him why I was endorsing him, and that it was not only his policies, but his character, his decency, the honor he communicated to everyone. And but he was also very, very, he and Roosevelt were very kind to Jill and me when we lost our son, Beau. They were there for us. And I don't know, it's, I think that what Jimmy Carter is an example of is just simple decency. Simple decency. And I think that's what the rest of the world looks to America for.
So what members of the family have you spoken to?
I think I've spoken to all the children. Maybe some I just got off the phone with. I think there were, I don't know how many on the phone, but I think, and I've spoken to some of the friends of the family. They're helping with the services, and my team is working with his family and others to see to it that he is remembered appropriately here in the United States and around the world. There's a process we're going through that will take a little time to set up this. I announced earlier today we're going to do a major service in Washington, D.C. on behalf of him. But that's a formal procedure that's underway. So I'm sure we start talking a lot to the family between now and my main contact is Chip.
Is there anything that President Trump to take from President Carter?
Decency. 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 Everybody deserves a shot. Everybody. Can you imagine Jimmy Carter walking by someone who needs something and just keep walking? Can you imagine Jimmy Carter referring to someone by the way they look or the way they talk? I can't. I can't. You know, I think the end of the deal here is that one of the reasons why we're looked to by the rest of the world, for the bulk of our nationhood, we've laid out what our values are. You said what we believe. It's not just in the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, but there's a feeling. The rest of the world looks to us. And he was worth looking to. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been watching President Biden deliver remarks following the death of former President Jimmy Carter. The president noted the world has lost a man he called a remarkable leader. He described Carter's life as being measured by deeds, not words, and by the principle of simple decency. Let's bring in CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa. Robert, what stood out to you about Biden's remarks?
Those were deeply personal remarks from President Biden, who's on vacation with his family ahead of the New Year holiday. And you see in those remarks, and you can hear in his tone, someone who had an appreciation for Carter, not only as a Democrat and as a president, but as a man, as a human being, someone who served his country in uniform, someone who connected with Biden years ago when Biden was a young senator, having been elected in 1972. Carter was an outsider running for president in the 1976 race, and Biden threw his weight behind Carter at that crucial moment. Carter certainly never forgot, and Biden never forgot it either. And you see in Biden's own life in presidency a bit of an echo of Carter's own example. Biden is not necessarily someone who would cite Carter as the model for his presidency, but the humanity of Jimmy Carter is something that Biden has always identified with as president, someone who could connect with working people, someone who always was caring about how people who were struggling would fare in this country. And there's a sensibility in the way Carter's lived his life and the way Biden's lived his, that you see this connection not only going back to that endorsement, but in the way both of them speak about the country and the presidency.
So talk to us more about President Biden's personal relationship with Jimmy Carter.
It began as a political one. Joe Biden was pretty savvy back in the 70s, didn't want to just be seen as a Washington establishment player, so he gave his endorsement to the outsider, Jimmy Carter. It was a bit of a political risk. Of course, it paid off. Carter ends up winning the nomination and the presidency in 1976. But Joe Biden stays in the Senate throughout 1977 to 81, and Biden builds his own career, has his own path, but he's someone who has clearly admired Jimmy Carter as Carter has built his own post-presidency. One quote that stuck out to me from President Biden's remarks tonight, he was asked by a reporter, what does Carter's post-presidency mean to you? And President Biden said, never give up hope, never give up hope. And that's not just a statement about Carter, but as a reporter who's interviewed President Biden in the residence of the White House and spent a lot of time talking to him and his allies over the years, there's a certain wistfulness about what Biden said when he's talking about Carter, because Biden himself is nearing the end of his own presidency. He is someone who has to think about a post-presidency. And Carter has revolutionized how post-presidencies work in the United States. It's not just about memoir writing and speech giving. It's about service. And that service component is important for the country to see, but it's also important for someone who's about to become a post-president.
And what will Biden's role be in the country's mourning of Jimmy Carter?
You see in Biden's remarks tonight a real affection for the Carter family. President Biden said he has spoken with the Carter children, and he's helping to facilitate what he said would be a major service here in Washington, D.C., that this would be something that the federal government would help orchestrate. Now, it's expected and appropriate for a former president, based on my conversations with both Democrat and Republican leaders, to have a state funeral for a former president. But it's never guaranteed, and you want to have the blessing and the engagement of the incumbent president for these sorts of things. And President Biden tonight talked about the process of putting this all together. It's worth noting that this has been in the works for years. Reporters and others behind the scenes have often remarked that the Carter Center has been ready for this moment for decades. President Carter, living to the age of 100, has outlived many, many people who were even part of this planning years ago. And what you're going to see over the coming days is a very structured process where the family will have time to come together. He'll ultimately go to Atlanta. His body will go to Atlanta for a viewing there and a service there. It'll go to Washington, and then it'll come back to Plains, back to the place he's always been from, back to southern Georgia, where he will be buried alongside his wife.
Robert Costa, thank you.
Thank you.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman joins us from St. Croix, where President Biden is on vacation. Can we expect to hear from the First Lady as well?
Hey there, Courtney. Good to be with you. Well, First Lady Jill Biden is traveling here with the president. Now, she did sign on to part of that statement that went out with the president's name on it, of course. And they talked about the relationship that the Bidens have had with the former president over the past 6 decades. The president himself talked about that. Now, we don't expect to necessarily see the First Lady give an on-camera statement, but they certainly have a connection. As Bob mentioned just now, they have this personal connection. The president talked about how he endorsed former President Jimmy Carter back in the 1970s, but also how they both got through cancer is something that has affected both families. The president saying that it affected, of course, him with the death of his son, but Carter was diagnosed with cancer himself. So this is something that both families have been able to console each other, to talk through those diagnoses, and, of course, to talk through the tragic death of President Biden's son. But they have a personal connection, one that's quite strong, and one that the First Lady shares as well as the president. Courtney.
So how soon can we expect the official funeral and memorials?
Yeah, that's something that is in the works, not only in Georgia, but also in Washington, D.C. Oftentimes it takes a bit to kind of coordinate this. You have a lot of people involved, not only the Carter family, who are having discussions, as President Biden mentioned. They're talking with his team. President Biden as commander-in-chief. He's also oftentimes consoler-in-chief when disaster strikes. This is certainly something where he will have not only a presence, perhaps giving remarks at that service, but also in leading the nation in grieving a former president, someone who lived to be 100, certainly a lengthy life outside of the presidency, a longer life than most presidents live once they've served their time. But I do anticipate that the president will be closely involved with the planning and execution of this. Remember, his administration has to also carry out the planning and execution of an inauguration of former President Donald Trump, now the president-elect. So both of those events are going to perhaps take a lot of planning. We know that a part of it, a state funeral, will take place in Washington, D.C., but we don't yet have a specific date in terms of when it will happen. But we do know that the White House will be deeply involved in that process.
And President Biden is wrapping up his time in office. What more can we expect from him in the days ahead?
Yeah, well, first off, he's here on vacation in St. Croix. We anticipate that he will head back to the East Coast of the United States later this week. One of the things I anticipate the president will roll out, and we heard this from John Kirby, the NSC spokesperson, he talked about how the president will continue to give out that security assistance for Ukraine. President Biden has committed to President Zelensky of Ukraine to make sure that they roll out the millions, over $1 billion worth of security assistance that the Ukrainians need to push back against Russian aggression. The president also saying in a statement just weeks ago that he is prepared to roll out more pardons and commute sentences of inmates that he deems eligible to receive those presidential pardon and commutation powers. We, of course, know that the president has commuted the sentences of over 1,000 people thus far and given out several pardons. And on top of that, one of those controversial pardons going to his son, Hunter Biden. But I do anticipate more of that coming from the White House, giving out those pardons and those commutations as well, Courtney.
William James Inman, thank you. For more, I want to bring in Lindsay Chervinsky. She's an American presidential historian and executive director of the George Washington Presidential Library. Tell us about Jimmy Carter's relationship with subsequent presidents after he served his one term and how he influenced him in his post-presidency.
Jimmy Carter had a very interesting relationship with his predecessors. You know, there is a president's club, and that makes sense because it is a job that few people can possibly understand. The decisions that come to the Oval Office are impossible ones. Otherwise, they get solved long before they reach the president's desk. And yet, if you look at pictures when Carter is standing with the other presidents, he's often a little bit to the side. There's sometimes a gap between him and some of the other members. And I think that that